but it's clear in some of the posts that these are, they're identifying themselves as police officers.
Tonight, RCMP won't confirm if racist comments by officers is being investigated.
We know that Quebec's system of justice doesn't necessarily work well for everyone.
The Quebec inquiry hears testimony on why Indigenous systems are better for Indigenous peoples.
Show them how things are going wrong and try to persuade that change.
And Senator Murray Sinclair offers some explanation to why reconciliation takes time. Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. A private Facebook group used by police officers across Canada shows shocking messages in support of Gerald Stanley's acquittal in the shooting death of 22-year-old Colton Bushy. One of those comments reads, quote, "Too bad the kid died, but he got what he deserved." Joining us now is one of the reporters who broke the story, Trina Roach from APTN Investigates. Trina, thanks so much for joining us to talk about this story. How did you come across the Facebook page?
I had someone that I know contact me, someone who was in this private group, and they just simply said, you need to check this out. And so I went on Facebook, I look up the site, it's called News Stories That Matter To or May Impact RCMP. So I request to join because it's a private group, and right away it asked for an employee ID number, which I don't have because I'm not an RCMP officer. And so I thought, well, I'm not going to get in, but surprisingly, there's two administrators, and I was added to the group. And so I get in there and I start looking at some of the comments that were made to recent stories in the news on the whole case involving the murder of Colton Bushy and the verdict in the Gerald Stanley trial. And it was really shocking, some of what I was reading.
What was in these posts?
It was clear, because some of the posts, I'll just start to say that some of the posts you don't know necessarily, like it's a group that's for current or former RCMP members, but there's like 1,200 members, so it's a closed group, but there's a lot of people, and you don't necessarily know like who everyone is, but it's clear in some of the posts that these are, they're identifying themselves as police officers. And so some of the posts, the one that was probably the most shocking, was that too bad the kid died, but he got what he deserved. And, reading that from a police officer who then continued to post negative comments about policing near or on reserves, and talking about, people pulling the race card and just really inflammatory and racist comments. And coming from a working police officer, it was really shocking. But that officer wasn't alone in those comments. There was other conversations. Somebody else posted, again, someone who is identifying themselves as a working police officer. It's still sad that Bushy died, but he made his fate. And so very much talking, well, people have to defend their property, that kind of argument. And it was just shocking to read. So very quickly, because as soon as I joined the group, they posted that media was now in the group and watching, so mind your P's and Q's. And I just started screen grabbing like all of these comments because a lot of them got deleted. And I think the Facebook page, even for the officer in question, she left the group, but now I think she's left Facebook altogether. And so we're sort of trying to follow up now on posts that that aren't there anymore. But luckily we were able to get in and see them because it might be a private group, but it's 1,200 people, and this is something that a police officer who's working, this is their mentality. And so I think that the RCMP has to account for that and has to explain how that happens.
Trina, what are the implications here? Have you heard from RCMP?
The RCMP did respond this morning. We had requested information yesterday. They responded in sort of an overarching way, not specifically on the officer that we were inquiring about and whether or not there's an investigation specifically on her and what that might look like. They did say that they have in the past investigated complaints about the use of inappropriate use of social media by its members. So it does happen. They said I asked again for numbers, like can they clarify, like how often does it happen, how many complaints, and what are the possible outcomes or penalties. I didn't hear back yet on that. So they did just say that they don't accept this, that it's antithetical to RCMP standards, that they're working very hard on public trust and reconciliation, and that this is unfortunate. But beyond that, not really anything specific to this case. Certainly from people in the community, I think there's just a lot of shock, right? And I think especially in the Bushy case, you just see there's been complaints. I mean, Charlie Angus said it in House Commons yesterday, that there's been complaints about racism in the RCMP investigation throughout this whole, from the police process through the courts on the Bushy case. And so there's some big questions, I think, now for the RCMP, because they did clear themselves of any wrongdoing in the investigation, but clearly there's sort of a deeper problem that needs to be addressed.
Trina, we're going to have to leave it there, but important work, and appreciate you taking the time to speak with us about it today.
Thanks, Dennis.
For more on this story and to see those screen grabs of the post, go to our website, aptnnews.ca. Senator Murray Sinclair addressed the Standing Senate Committee on Aboriginal Peoples in Ottawa Wednesday. The committee is currently studying the new relationship between Canada and Indigenous peoples. Here's some of his response when asked why it's taking so long for concrete action when it comes to seeing change.
Education is the key to reconciliation, because if we can start to talk to children in society about how to talk to each other and about each other with more respect and understand this history, but also understand the society that they're growing up in a better way, they will be the engines of change in the future. And that's also why we say reconciliation is going to take a long time, because those generations have to be allowed to grow up and to be re-educated or to be educated and to take over the reins of power eventually. And the people who are now in positions of power, we still have to talk to them. We still have to show them in our report the facts and to show them how things are going wrong and try to persuade that change. But that's going to take longer there, because they're used to succeeding in the environment that exists today.
And we always want to hear what you have to say about this or any other story. Here's how to contact us. Send an email to news@aptn.ca. Like our APTN National News Facebook page. Follow us on Twitter @APTN News, or go to our website, aptnnews.ca. Today was day 13 in the trial of Raymond Cormier. He's accused of killing 15-year-old Tina Fontaine, whose body was pulled from the Red River in Winnipeg in August 2014. Cormier was expected to present his defense to the jury today, but that didn't happen. Instead, his defense team said they were willing to proceed directly to their closing arguments. That will happen next week. Time for a quick break, but stick around. There's more to come.
Hello, I'm Todd Lamourand, and here's what's coming up on Nation to Nation. The political panel debates yesterday's announcement by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. He promised before the next election to have a legislative framework in place to recognize Indigenous rights. It will guide all government interactions with Indigenous people. Opposition parties wonder if this can be done in the given time frame. As well, I'll speak to a policy analyst who is troubled by the lack of details from Trudeau. That's coming up right after the national news.
Here's a look at Friday's weather forecast, starting on a cloudy and wet east coast. +6 in rain in Halifax, a rain-snow mix and 3 above in St. John's. -19 in Nain, sunny, and -27 in La Grande. -3 for Sept-Îles, sunny, and 19 below in Chibougamau. -3 in Sarnia, London, and Ottawa on Friday. Sunny, and -9 in Thunder Bay and Sudbury. Over to northern Manitoba, minus 14 under the sun in Thompson and Norway House, minus 9 for Gimli Harbor and Brandon. Over to Saskatchewan, minus 7 in Estevan and Regina, minus 4 in Swift Current, and minus 22 in Stony Rapids, minus 23 in Uranium City.
Welcome back. Quebec's inquiry into relations with Indigenous peoples has often focused on the negative, particularly with the legal system. But Thursday's testimony was centered on a possible solution, First Nations taking justice into their own hands. Tom Fenario has the story.
This orange part is the international border, and the yellow part is the border between Quebec and Ontario. And we have to live here.
Akwesasne Mohawk territory is crisscrossed by colonial borders. It's something they've grown accustomed to.
So our kids real early, they learn, do we use the money with the man on it, or do we use the money with the woman on it?
But it's also a jurisdictional nightmare, which is why last year they took matters into their own hands.
We made a historical statement saying we have a court that is separate from Canada and the provinces.
As the director of the Department of Justice for Akwesasne, Joyce King testified today at the Quebec inquiry about the benefits of having their own court. Chief among them, not needing permission from a province or state to make your own law.
We are hoping that we can start other First Nations to establish their own system that would incorporate their own values.
While major crimes like sexual assault or murder would still be tried off territory, for lesser crimes, Akwesasne uses restorative justice practices were deemed appropriate.
So restorative justice means bringing balance back into the community. If you have done something wrong, how are you going to either mitigate it or make up for what you have done?
Ganawage Mohawk territory isn't far behind Akwesasne. In 2015, they enacted their own Justice Act and are currently in the process of getting it implemented. Ganawage Justice Commissioner Kevin Fleischer testified that often community members will leave disputes unresolved rather than go to a Quebec court.
We know that Quebec's system of justice doesn't necessarily work well for everyone. It doesn't always take into consideration local customs, traditions, and practices.
Quebec Inquiry Commissioner Jacques Vien observed that many Indigenous groups would love to have their own court system. Joyce King was quick to offer advice to other nations that want to do so.
No one gives you authority, you exercise it.
Tom Fenario, APTN National News, Montreal.
Earlier in the week, the Quebec inquiry heard testimony many Inuit would be able to relate to. Health, employment, and services in the Nunavik region in northern Quebec were the main focus. Here again is Tom with more.
As the Director of Health and Social Services in Nunavik, Minnie Gray says the healthcare system in northern Quebec has created class divisions. One where non-Inuit can make $40,000 in non-salary benefits, while local Inuit are entitled to only a quarter of that.
Since we're no longer in the 60s and we can hop on a plane any day now and have the capabilities and the technology, if we're not in the isolated place anymore, can we just do away with what was given in the 60s so we can all be even?
The reason is that according to union rules for health service providers, workers are entitled to benefits for working more than 50 kilometers away from where they live. Benefits include vehicle expenses, flights back home, and perhaps most offensive to Gray, free housing where overcrowding is rampant.
The inequality comes in the fact that we're not offering these incentives to local people, so we're not attracting them to be working in our services.
Because many jobs in Nunavik require knowledge of Inuit culture and language, local workers are highly sought after. Many leave their own communities to make what non-Inuit make, which in turn renders everything more expensive. There's also the issue of a lack of qualified Inuit. Jean-François Artaud, a lawyer for Nunavik Health Services, says Quebec is not meeting its education and training obligations under the James Bay Agreement.
Ça fait plus de 40 ans que la Convention est signée. On n'est pas dans les premières années de mise en œuvre, là. On est 40 ans plus tard et toujours c'est compliqué pour les Inuits d'accéder à des postes qui sont designés pour eux.
Gray's team at Nunavik Health and Social Services has proposed a solution. They want new positions created just for Inuit workers that would them better compensated.
The fact that we are still trying to convince the ministry that giving equality to local workers can save a lot of money, because we have very high turnover of non-locals coming in.
Gray says Quebec's Ministry of Health hasn't jumped at the idea. For now, she hopes a push from the inquiry will lead to progress in the future.
I'm very pleased that I was able to be here with my colleagues and to have a voice. I think the most important is that we are allowed to have a voice and someone is listening.
Tom Fenario, APTN National News, Montreal.
The statue of Halifax founder Edward Cornwallis may have been taken down, but his shadow remains. On this week's APTN Investigates, reporter Trina Roach looks into how history and reconciliation clash over monuments and statues. Here's a preview of History Decolonized.
Statues come down, it happens all around the world.
You're changing history, you're changing culture, you're changing history, you're changing culture. Where does it stop?
We can't change history, we can't rewrite history.
But some say history isn't set in stone.
That's very one-sided. You can't erase histories. Only settler people, only the colonists can erase history.
You can rewrite history. We've got a great example right here, the statue of Edward Cornwallis. It's a sanitized version of history, the history I grew up reading.
Longer than I've been alive, people have been trying to tear that down.
The statue as it is an impediment to progress.
It represents a monument to white supremacist thinking.
Like with Cornwallis, it's not just removing the statue, it's also the reckoning that includes around colonial violence.
It's this dismissiveness. It doesn't exist. Racism doesn't exist in Canada.
But decades of debate over history can lead to historic moments.
Here it is, finally, reconciliation in action.
Cornwallis is just one of many historical figures at the center of controversy over commemoration. When the view of colonial history shifts, the truth can be ugly.
It's important that we decolonize our history, because the history that we did grow up learning, that I was taught, was a colonial history.
Looks very good. You can see the rest of the episode tomorrow night on APTN Investigates right after the news. Nearly 1,000 youth took to the steps of Parliament Hill today. We'll tell you why after the break.
Here's the rest of Friday's weather forecast, picking back up in northern Alberta. Minus 18 in Fort Chipewyan, minus 12 in Fort McMurray, minus 6 on Friday in Red Deer and Edmonton. A nice day on the west coast, plus 9 in Victoria, plus 7 in Vancouver, minus 5 for Prince George, sunny, and minus 8 in Dease Lake. A cloudy day in Yukon, minus 11 in Rock River and Watson Lake. Sunny across NWT, minus 11 in Fort Simpson and Trout Lake, minus 19 in Colville Lake and Paulatuk on Friday. Over to Nunavut, where it is downright chilly, minus 42 in Whale Cove and Baker Lake, minus 44 in Chesterfield, minus 44 as well in Tallyoak and Joe Haven.
Welcome back. Students from across the Ottawa region gathered on the steps of Parliament Hill today. Their message to the Prime Minister: have a heart for First Nations youth. With the story from Ottawa, here's APTN's Annette Francis.
Almost 1,000 kids gathered to share their letters of hope, peace and justice for First Nations. They're here for the 6th annual Have a Heart campaign. For 13-year-old Laura Kivimaki, it's her second time participating.
They bring kids together and educate people on what's important in terms of dealing with these things and getting equal education on reserves and funding. And it's also a good way because all this stuff is in the curriculum to teach kids, so it's really good for teachers to be able to bring the students here and really see what it's like and kind of apply their knowledge.
Their letters are for the Prime Minister. They're asking for clean water, health care, and equality for First Nations kids. It's an important event, according to this group of raging grannies.
We think this is a wonderful initiative. We think what the kids are saying is amazing, and we're just here to support this action.
And she looked to me.
The one-hour event ended with a familiar song by NDP MP Charlie Angus, Diamonds in the Snow. Annette Francis, APTN National News, Ottawa.
Great event. Conversations around identity, childhood, and memories are just some of the topics explored in a new all-female play taking the stage in Yellowknife this weekend. Charlotte Morton-Jacobs caught up with some of the cast today.
Here you go. Indian red, although now it's called chestnut.
It's not your normal play.
Wow.
Here in Yellowknife, women from different generations and different parts of the Northwest Territories are running a final rehearsal. It's a play where even the title is unique.
What's really cool about this project is that it has 3 titles. One of the titles is Yene Yati, the other is Alnet Okasit, and the other is Women's Words. So what we wanted to do was have sort of a have many different groups that are in the Northwest Territories represented in some way.
We'll do the scene more or less until Elaine's done and leaves. Yeah, that's it. Oh, okay.
It took just under 3 weeks to create what these actors call a play for Indigenous women.
When we did these writing exercises and explored themes, there was a lot of laughter and it was a lot of discovery and, of course, tears.
For Anelta Arluk, Women's Words is a chance to change perceptions around who gets to participate on stage.
Hello. Theater is normally really not an Indigenous space. The audience is Indigenous women, and that we should talk to each other rather than educating a non-Indigenous audience or, you know, trying to... Because once you start doing that, then you kind of really lose that person-to-person contact.
Coloring.
Tiffany Eilick says once the show hits the road, it will also give a realistic depiction of life in the North.
Because I think a lot of Southern Canadians have this very fairy tale, romanticized idea of the Arctic and of the North, and I'm hoping that we can offer a really balanced, full experience of the North.
Okay, okay, ladies, shall we give it another shot? Yes.
Women's Words will hit the stage February 17th before being toured down south this spring. Charlotte Morton-Jacobs, APTN National News, Yellowknife.
And we'll keep an eye out for that. That's your APTN National News for this Thursday. For news anytime, including more on the comments made by an RCMP officer, visit our website, aptnnews.ca. Now stick around. Nation to Nation with Todd Lamarand is up next. I'm Dennis Ward. Have a great night. I'll see you back here tomorrow.